Greetings, Twitch and YouTube. What is going on this side? I heard a random voice coming from somewhere. That was interesting. So yeah. PT was intense. I'm moving you. Okay. I'm glad. I'm glad that you have some sort of direction. But I'm sorry that was intense. Yeah, I'm trying to share this out because everybody seems to be quite busy. Alrighty, so where we stopped off yesterday was Enron. She was talking about the Indian government paying Enron to essentially not produce electricity in India. So he asks, so Enron, even though it's bankrupt in the United States and disgraced, is still making money out of the Indian economy. And she said, yes, there's a big litigation process, but that's the situation. Okay, so now we get to Bill Gates. And he asks, Bill Gates of Microsoft, one of the sahibs of the New World Economic Order, was shopping in Delhi. He met with top government officials and CEOs, and you saw something interesting on TV about how Indians view Gates. And Gates is an interesting topic in the global south because we have very much, what's the word? Heroized and kind of, what's the word here I'm looking for? Where we see these private, these company owners as heroes of the global south because we see them as saving us. But we know that that's not the case. A lot of us know it's not the case. But it's a lot of people rely on them to be this kind of savior from whatever companies are doing. Thank you, Chris. They feed us with scraps on one hand, and then they grab things like land and resources with the other. So Gates owns large swathes of land in the global south, and all of these, and Jeff Bezos owns warehouses, and they have huge shares in mining companies that are stripping us of our natural resources. And for this, we need to go back to. Sorry, I'm rubbing my eyes because my eyes are all itchy. We need to go back to Walter Rodney. And Walter Rodney was one of the people who outlined what had happened right at the start of trade between the West and Africa. And how he puts it is so perfect. He says that, they decided the value of our resources. they decided the prices that we sell our resources to them, and they then took those resources and manufactured them and then sold it back to us at a premium. And it's what they do with everything that comes from the global south. So somebody like Bill Gates will be seen as this, oh, he has so many aid foundations, or he's giving so much money to organizations in Africa while owning all of this land that cannot be used by the indigenous populations, by owning all of these, owning shares in all of these companies that are essentially taking our resources from us and then selling them back to us at a premium. So she says, I was watching some music channel, not MTV, but some other music channel this morning. On the screen it said, what does Bill Gates really want? They then had an interview with maybe 20 young students. Every single one of them said he's here to blow open the market for Windows and he's just trying to get publicity by giving money for AIDS. Nobody was under any illusions about what this visit was about. And that is younger people. Older people will say, oh, but these organizations are like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're doing such excellent work. I think we know better now. Does that encourage you, that people have that understanding? And she responds, 3 or 4 months ago, I went to a seminar on the power sector and thought to myself, what are you doing here? How can you be sitting in the seminar on privatization of power? If someone had told me 4 years ago that I would be attending meetings about electricity, I would have laughed. But it was uplifting to listen to the kind of minds that are at work here. People can just take the whole thing apart and critique it. The first critique of the power purchase agreement with Enron came from a small NGO in Pune called Prayas. Everything they said has come true. That's the great thing about India. There's a strong intellectual ability to take something apart in a way that I really appreciate and admire. Now, she doesn't really answer the question. Kind of, she answers it. But in essence, yes, it is encouraging that people are deconstructing what we know as reality and saying these are the powers that are at play here. This is the kind of this is the power struggle that is at play. To what extent do you think that the British used divide and rule as a strategy to maintain control of India? I just realized I don't have my glasses on because my glasses are on the other side of the computer. Why they are here, I have no idea. A vast country. The British had very few soldiers and administrators. She responds, the British certainly used divide and rule tactics, but the British Empire survived because it co-opted the Indian elite. It's the same technique that empire uses now to propagate neoliberal reign. And that is so important to understand. So important to understand. Because by co-opting the elite and giving the elite handouts, what they have done is said, oh, okay, now we have the cream of the crop. So now let's use them to further our aims elsewhere. Have you read the work of Martin Luther King Jr., greatly influenced by Gandhi? People in the United States generally know about his I Have a Dream speech from the 1963 March in Washington, but not a lot of Americans know about the speech he gave in New York in 1967 at Riverside Church. He became increasingly radical late in life, and in New York he said, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to the beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Yes. Hi, B. An edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And yes, MLK was increasingly radical in his later years. And of course, the US was very scared of what he was capable of. And now the USA, loves to. Hi! Oh, it's so good to see you. Yes. Oh, I love it. Because people love to tokenize him and forget that the US killed him anyway. So, Arundhati Roy responds, "That is the terrible dilemma of living in India, isn't it? Every moment of every day you're faced with the brutal inequalities of the society you live in. So it's impossible to forget even for a moment. Just to enjoy the ordinary daily things, the clothes you wear, the fun you have, the music you listen to, the roof over your head, the meal in the evening, involves knowing that other people don't have these privileges." He really was a truly great leader. "We have been taught that peace is the opposite of war, but is it? In India, peace is a daily battle for food and shelter and dignity." And that's exactly what she was saying earlier about terrorism. That state terrorism is is true terrorism. When people are denied things like food, shelter, and dignity, that is terrorism. MLK Jr. wrote in his letter from Birmingham jail that that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. So important to remember. And she responds, or at least the journey toward justice, towards some vision of egalitarianism, which is what I think is fundamentally the problem with the whole ethic of neoliberal neo-capitalism. Thank you. You make it all right to grab. You say that it's all right to get ahead by hitting the next person on the head. It's all right to accumulate capital and profit at anyone else's expense. It destroys the fabric of concern and fellow feeling. There's a finite amount of capital in the world, and if you accumulate, you're grabbing from somebody, and that's not right. Question. Another one of the sahibs who has recently been in Delhi is Paul O'Neill, the US Treasury Secretary. He was talking on November 22nd to an audience of corporate leaders, and he was critical of India, a country, he said, where corruption and bribery are widespread, frightening away honest businessmen and investors. Thank you. That's so rich coming from the US Treasury Secretary. Wow. And she says, if it's frightening away investors like Enron and Bechtel, it can only be a good thing. It's interesting that he should be lecturing Indians about corruption and bribery, because the US has just gone through what Business Week calls the most unprecedented corporate crime wave in history. Not just Enron, but WorldCom, Xerox, Tyco, Arthur Andersen. A huge number of corporations have been guilty of insider trading and all kinds of shenanigans. So, when have Americans' own shortcomings prevented it from lecturing to other people? That's par for the course. She is so tongue-in-cheek. Oh, yeah. Yes, Brooke. When have America's own shortcomings prevented it from lecturing to other people? Yeah, the truth, absolute truth. Hi, JJ. Howard Zinn, the great American historian, said that there was the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and today we live in the age of irony. So she says, irony is a kind word for the crimes of the American empire. And that's true. In your essay titled Come September, you are critical of US policy in support of Israel and its repression of the Palestinian people. You must know that this is a hot button issue in the US. It's difficult to talk about Israel critically without immediately being labeled in the most unflattering terms. He is being very diplomatic here. Why do you choose to talk about this? So she responds, oh my goodness, it's about mass enslavement of all colors with no creative and spiritual lives. I mean, some more than others. I was talking about the 11th of September, and I thought I should remind people that the 11th of September 1922 was when Imperial Britain marked out a mandate on Palestine after the Balfour Declaration in 1917. 80 years on, the Palestinians are still under siege. How can one come to the United States and not mention Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine? The US government is funding it and supporting it politically and morally. It's a crime. Diaspora communities are notorious for having very inflammatory views. If you look at the most right-wing, unreasonable, vituperative Hindu, vituperative, I can never say it, vituperative Hindus, many live in the US. Every time you get a letter to the editor saying, I think there should be a nuclear war and Pakistan should be destroyed, it will be somebody who lives in Urbana or some other US town. I've never been to Israel, but I've been told that in Israel, the media reflects the broader spectrum of opinion that you see in the United States. Thank you so much, Tebe. Thank you. Yay! Thank you so much. And you all know my views. There's a one-state solution, a Palestinian state. Thank you so much, Tepe. You don't have to. But yeah, we must catch up. Because there's a lot. What do you think of the report that just came out looking at the Indian diaspora community of the US? Apparently, some segments of it are sending a lot of money to support Hindu fundamentalist organizations. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, yeah. Understood. So many Indians are in support of white supremacy. Because Indians as a whole, we feel that we are aligned with whiteness because of our elite and a whole lot of other things that come from decades, if not centuries, of assimilation. Assimilation to whiteness, assimilation to Westernism, assimilation to the systems that drive Western hegemony. And it's frankly embarrassing. So she says, the report seems credible. It's quite important that this kind of dogged work is being done, and it's really wonderful. These groups hide behind the fact that they do charity work, but their charities are all about the Hinduization of tribal people. But in India, these things will not be investigated because the government is Hindu nationalist. And Hindu nationalism is an oxymoron because Hinduism is not one collective belief system. That is a colonized concept. Yes, that is rare. But also not so much, because on the outside you'll have wonderful experiences, like people having the most beautiful conversations and kindness and come over and have food and all of these wonderful things. But underneath, they will look at you. Somebody from the family will look at you and say, that person is beneath us. I made a video years ago. Remember when that sound was trending from Community? I can excuse racism, but I draw the line at animal cruelty. The video that I made said, I can excuse abusers in the family, but I draw the line at your bra strap showing. You can excuse abusers in the family? So, yeah, that's essentially non resident Indians in a nutshell. And I'm writing a horror story right now about the Great White North. Let's put it that way. A South African Indian woman being kidnapped by a cult in the Great White North. And I'll leave it at that. What was your take on the US presidential election in 2000, especially in the light of the US tendency to be critical of how elections are conducted in other countries? Oof, that was a bombshell of an election. I don't have to say that I didn't follow it very closely, because if you don't live in America, whether it's Bush or Clinton or Gore, it doesn't seem to make much difference. I personally feel that if the September 11th attacks had happened when Clinton was in power, it could have been worse for the world in a way, because he doesn't sound as dumb as Bush. Bush is vicious, but he's comical, easy meat, whereas Clinton is cleverer and more calculating. He's more of a showman. I don't think there's much to choose between them. And it's true, and it's something that I say time and time again about US elections. In the US, you vote for harm reduction. Outside of the US, you can criticize both. And I absolutely fucking hate everything that Harris stands for. I hate Trump more. You have used the word bully to describe the United States and its policies. I think that maybe some Americans might have difficulty identifying their state as a bully because of the lack of information about what's going on outside. That is on purpose. News is withheld from people inside the US on purpose. The fact that I can name almost every single state in the US alphabetically, but most Americans cannot tell me, firstly, where Africa is on a map, let alone where South Africa is on that map. That's telling. Am I a unicorn? Yes, you are. People from poorer places and poorer countries have to call upon their compassion not to be angry with ordinary people in the US. I certainly do. Every time I write something, the anger does come out, and then I pull it back because I tell myself, they don't know. These are people who don't know what's being done in their name. Yet I keep wondering if that's because it suits them not to know. I have to remind myself about the extent of brainwashing that goes on in the US. But I think if most people knew what was being done in their name, they would be mortified. The question then is, how do we let them know? And now, she was talking here about just under 10 years ago. Now, people do know. There's so much more access to information. So people do know. Ben Bagdikian and others have written extensively about how the corporate media operates in the US, and by extension in the rest of the world because of its enormous reach. Do you think that the people who work for these corporations know the reality, the facts about what's going on, and are repressing it? Or are they truly ignorant? And that is a good question. Because you have to ask yourself, especially with the access to information that we have now, are people just being willfully ignorant? I'm sure senior people know. Junior people are sent on a beat and told to cover something, just talking about journalists, and they cover it. So I don't think everybody knows the key secret and is suppressing it. Journalists have this illusion of independence, but certainly these people who make the decisions definitely do know. And that is telling. Where are the spaces for dissent in the Indian context? What about television? She says there's no space on TV whatsoever, not even to show a documentary film like, say, Sanjay Kak's film on the Narmada. We don't even begin to think that it will be shown on TV. The Indian film censors are so tough. There was a huge uproar when there was a Tibetan flag shown in a Bollywood movie. I can't remember the name of the movie. I think it was Rockstar. Where in the crowd, a Tibetan flag was being flown. To be shown in cinemas in India, which is obviously the largest audience of that buys into Bollywood movies. It couldn't be shown until the Tibetan flag was edited out of that scene. So he asks, why not? Why isn't there a station or a network? She says, why not? You can't even have a private screening of a documentary film without a censor certificate. When Anat Parudan made his documentary about the nuclear issue, the censor board told him, you can't show politicians in your film. You can't show politicians in your film? What does that mean? You can't have politicians making political speeches in your film. It's Kafkaesque. Yet they can't police everything. It's too difficult. So in a country like the US, where books like Chomsky's 9/11 are starting to reach wider audiences, aren't people going to feel a bit pissed off when they find they had no idea about what was going on and what was being done in their name? If the corporate media continues to be as outrageous in its suppression of facts as it is, it might just lift off like a scab. It might become something that's totally irrelevant, that people just don't believe, because ultimately, people are interested in their own safety. And that is why empire uses the safety narrative to justify war. The policies the US government is following are dangerous for its citizens. It's true that you can bomb or buy out anybody that you want to, but you can't control the rage that is building in this world. You just can't. And that rage will express itself in some way or the other. Condemning violence is not going to be enough. How can you condemn violence when your section of the economy is based on selling weapons and making bombs and piling up chemical and biological warfare? When the soul of your culture worships violence. Oof. On what grounds are you going to condemn terrorism unless you change your attitude toward violence? And a lot of people, on the left especially, are seeing that condemning terrorism is the violence. Because what our governments tell us are terrorists are often freedom fighters. So, question. With few exceptions, the September 11th attacks are presented as actions by people who simply hate America. Okay? It's separated from political backgrounds. That has confused a lot of people, no? She says it was a successful strategy, this isolation of the events of September 11th from history, insisting that terrorism is an evil impulse with no context, and it does the same with racism. It does the same with gender-based violence. It does the same with capitalist violence. The minute you try to put it into a larger context, you are accused of excusing or justifying. It's like telling a scientist who is researching drugs for malaria that they are in cahoots with the female Anopheles mosquito. If you're trying to understand something, it doesn't mean you're justifying it. The fact is, you can justify all the wars that you have fought, the murders that you've committed, all the countries you've bombed, all the ecologies you've destroyed. If you can justify that, then Osama bin Laden can certainly use the same logic to justify September 11th. You can't have a political context for one kind of terrorism and none for another. Yep, yep. She is saying what we are all feeling. And one of the reasons I love her writing is that she puts it so beautifully, in such simple and elegant terms, that it gives us a language when we are struggling for those words to describe the rage that we feel. Hi, how are you doing, Lotus? I hope you're well. She gives a language to the rage. And it's not just the rage that we feel, it's the love behind that rage, the passion, the, the want for a better world that lies behind that rage. So, if you were to take an average American, what would be something that you would say in terms of trying to understand why there's animosity towards the United States? Why is there rage and anger? She says, I was in America in September 2002. I was reluctant to come. I thought that there wasn't any point in saying these things, but I don't believe in speaking truth to power. Because, as she said earlier, that power knows the truth. They're just hiding it. I don't believe that there is any way that you can persuade the kind of power to act differently unless it's in its own self-interest. There isn't any point, but as my editor persuaded me to come, I'm so glad I did, because it was nice for me to see how human and open the people I met were. People were clearly trying to understand what was going on in the world. So it was an important trip for me. I had exactly the opposite experience from what I expected. I had people coming up to me on the street saying, thank you for saying what you said, and we can't say it because we're scared. But thank you. It was wonderful for me. It made me believe that the reason that so much energy and money is poured into manipulating the media is because the establishment fears public opinion. They know that ordinary people are not as ruthless, cold, calculating as powerful people. Ordinary people do have a conscience, don't necessarily always act in their own selfish interests. If the bubble were to burst and people were to know all of the horrendous things that have been carried out in their name, I think it would go badly for the American establishment. And it is beginning. It has begun. I think all America's family secrets are spilling out backstage on the green room floor. I really think so. So it's true that corporate media just blanks out everything, but on the internet, some of the most outraged, incandescently angry pieces are written by Americans themselves. A film like Bowling for Columbine has been shown everywhere, and it connects the dots in ways which ordinary people can understand, and this is important. It's beginning to unravel. I think the propaganda machine is going to come apart. Yes, and it needs to come apart. What about the role of intellectuals in the propaganda machine? In the US, intellectuals are supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be accumulating facts and presenting them without presuming to be on one side or the other. They're encouraged to use obscure jargon. For example, there are no ideas and everything is a notion. No one talks, it's all discourse. It's what we call postmodernism. Do you have something like that in India? Yeah. She says we have POMO in India too. Definitely. A lot of it has to do with the sad business of creating a little expertise so that you come off sounding special, as if the world couldn't do without you. A little hunk of expertise and you carry off to your lair and guard against the unauthorized curiosity of passers-by. My enterprise is the opposite. To never complicate what is simple. To never simplify what is complicated. But I think it's important to be able to communicate to ordinary people what is happening in the world. There's a whole industry working hard at trying to prevent people from understanding what is being done to them. Yep. Sorry. My tea was going to get cold if I didn't gulp it. It says, "You got this," on the mug. I'm going to tell you, you got this. And I'm going to tell that to you, especially Chris, you got this. Chomsky calls them a Mandarin class of specialists. Chomsky has a way with words, doesn't he? Experts take away the ability to make decisions from people. In courts, language has evolved in such a way that ordinary people can't understand. You're given this phalanx of lawyers and judges who are deciding vitally important issues, but people can't understand what is being said, what the procedure is, and what's going on. Oh my goodness. Yes. So he asks, I noticed that in the film Damage, it was difficult to follow some of the pronouncements from the Supreme Court. Legalese is confusing on purpose. Because who were the lawyers? Who were the bailiffs? Who were the judges? Who were the people making and enacting the law outside of the police? Because, every master needs an attack dog, and that's the police. But who were the solicitors? Who were the people doing all of these things, pretending to represent the people when they were actually representing the elite and they were representing property? Be it property in terms of land, be it property in terms of resources, be it property in terms of people. Who were those people historically? Who were the people who wrote the rules? The people who wanted to maintain and increase that control so that they maintain their property. It's all a capitalist sham. That is why lawyers are cops. We see lawyers very differently here, because a lot of lawyers were part of the liberation movement. But worldwide, lawyers are cops. Yeah, Tebe, are you having a little bit of a realization? So she says, of the film Damage, vicious stultification and vulgar debunking cannot be allowed to pollute the stream of justice. And she laughs. What is another one? Contumacious violation. I've forgotten. I used to know it by heart. Do you see any role for specialized knowledge? I see a role for specialized knowledge, but I think it's important for there to be an arena where it's shared, communicated. It's not that somebody should have specialized knowledge. The ability to dig a trench and lay cable is kind of specialized knowledge too. Farmers have specialized knowledge too. The question is, what sort of knowledge is privileged in our societies? Yes. Hi, Marth. And this is something I say all the time. And I once was an intellectual snob. I was one of those people who was like, you got to have a degree. You got to have a certain type of knowledge, yada, yada, yada. Not valuing all types of knowledge, ranking different types of knowledge. And that wasn't cool of me. That was awful. And that kind of elitism, it doesn't help anyone. I bought into that elitism because I didn't know any better. And once I learned more about why that elitism exists and was able to take it apart and say, we have to actually resist that kind of, as academics, resist that kind of instinct to be elitist, that kind of indoctrination. Yeah, same Lotus. Because I came from a family that very much valued book education rather than all types of education. Learning all of that, it is my absolute true belief now that the system of blue-collar work is there to devalue various types of knowledge to justify poverty wages. The question is, what sort of knowledge is privileged in our society? I don't think that a CEO is more valuable in society and ought to be paid $10 million a year while farmers and laborers starve. The range of what is valued has become so extreme that one lot of people have captured it and left 3/4 of the world to live in unthinkable poverty because their work is not valued. What would happen if the sweepers of the city went on strike or the sewage system didn't work? A CEO wouldn't be able to deal with his own shit. Yep. Macaulay, a Raj official in the 19th century, imperiously declared, "A single shelf of a good European library is worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia." In recent years, there's been an enormous surge of writing produced not only by Indian writers such as yourself, but also writers of Indian origin who live outside of India, like V.S. Naipaul. Why is that happening now? Thank you, Nikki. It's not that enormous a surge, actually. I remember when my novel was first published. The New Yorker organized to shoot one big photograph of Indo-Anglian writers. There were maybe 10 or 15 of us. They'd organized this huge bus to take us to lunch, and the bus was empty. Everyone's talking about the surge, but you can count the people who are known on your fingertips. It's made out to be something more than it really is, I think. And that is why, okay. So she says to the question, is it a fad? There are people writing, but it's not some renaissance or anything that's happening. It's a fad for the Western world. Then that's their business. I don't care. I love that kind of attitude. So I need to tell you something about art that is made by the Global South. Anybody with brown skin. The kind of art that we make is only consumable by the West and celebrated and valued by the West if it is telling a sob story, if it is telling about how difficult our lives are, if it is telling a story of how of what hardships we had to go through as people from here or there or wherever, living in this different skin, to the people who get the most representation in the world, who are unfortunately the ones who have all the buying power. So in order to be commercially successful, aka visible and consumable by white people, we have to have a certain narrative. And that narrative is the sad story of the Global South. People don't want to listen to brown writers if brown writers are talking about something joyful. Because where's the pain that can be consumed by America? How can we gnaw on your pain? That is what they want. They want to chew on our distress. And that angers me. Because we have so many more stories to tell than just colonial pain. But it's ignored. Because the world of whiteness wants to consume us in every way possible. It's infuriating that as a writer, I get told that this is too much of a happy story. Or, why are you writing horror that's not race-based if your characters are brown? Especially since South Africans are so damn funny. Yes! Good Lord! Like, us South Africans, get onto South African Twitter for half an hour. You will be in stitches. Just laughing. I wish him. But when you have this constant need for whiteness to consume us in so many different ways, you end up diminishing yourself as a writer. You end up diminishing yourself as a storyteller to the stories that can be eaten. Exactly. I get told this all the time, and I write horror as one of my side things. I write short stories that sling between utter horror and utter joy. And yes, race does come into it because you cannot take anything out of that racialized context because that's our existence. But it's not the be-all and end-all of the trauma. And so it's so important to create those links between the personal and the political, to tell politics like a story, to make it real to people so that people understand this is what's going on in the world. But I want to tell those little stories of joy. People think, oh, because you were abused as a child, you had a really sad childhood. Au contraire. My parents are such wonderful people. And I grew up so loved. Yeah, JJ. And there was so much joy. Even in the sense of I remember this one day, my dad, those oil drums? My dad brought home an oil drum, and every time my dad brought home something that was just a little bit out of the ordinary, the look of excitement on his face was always palpable. And he took an angle grinder and he sliced this oil drum from top to bottom in the middle, and then he took a soldering, this massive freaking industrial soldering iron, and he basically he blunted the edges of the oil drum so it wouldn't cut us, and then put these little legs underneath it and then fill them with water so my sister and I would have our little private pools in the middle of summer. Why does that have to be racialized? The understanding in telling those stories is that we were growing up in an Indian township where we weren't allowed to build pools by the apartheid government. But for a 5-year-old, that's not a racialized story. For the 5-year-old telling that story, yes, exactly, Lotus. Joy is the pit stop on a pendulum that swings between despair and depression. Yes, it is that dead center of that moments of joy. For a 5-year-old, that's not racialized. So why do my stories now, my stories of joy, have to be racialized? Because the audience that is whiteness wants to eat our despair. And our despair is entertainment to them. Our despair is hypothetical. And that is why you get white people being able to say, let me play devil's advocate. The devil does not need any more advocates. Thank you very much. Some people say that writing in English automatically means you're writing for a yuppie audience because English in India is particularly a language of privilege. And people say the same of writing in English in Africa. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was criticized constantly for writing in English. So she says it's true, but at the same time, any language in India is limited. If you write in Malayalam, only someone from Kerala can read it. If you write in Hindi, only those from a few states in the north can read it. So language is complicated. It's interesting that The God of Small Things has been published in 40 languages. So in a way, it's about language, but not as English or German or French or Hindi. It's something more than that. It's language as communication, more or less. My political writing is published in many Indian languages. The Hindi translation of The God of Small Things is almost ready. So it's no longer just for yuppies. And anyway, it's not just yuppies who speak English. There are more people who speak English in India than in England. That's a huge number. One of the pleasures for me about having written The God of Small Things is that many people who are reading it would not normally read an English novel. So a sub-inspector from Musavnagar or some person from some village somewhere will come to me and say, I read it with a dictionary and I understood it. So I love the range of readers, from John Updike to policemen in Musafnagar. She gets into okay, one more question and then I'm going to continue the discussion but stop reading. Your articles and essays appear in The Nation magazine and publishing with South End Press. Power Politics is your first book with them, and War Talk is the next one. Are you getting a lot of responses from outside India? Are people writing to you? She says, I do receive a lot of letters, but it's difficult for me to deal with the volume of responses and requests. I'm under pressure to turn myself into an institution, to have an office and secretaries and people dealing with my mail and accounts. I'm not like that. I can't be like that. So I choose the inefficient model, which is not to deal with it, and do what I can. Obviously, I have a literary agent in America and England. They help me, but in my own space, I just don't have that. It's hard, but it's a choice I make. I just continue to be an individual who gets a lot of mail and can't handle it. She is my type of person. And so that's where I'll stop with the reading for today. But essentially, if you are not Arundhati Roy, if you are not V.S. Naipaul, if you are not one of those writers that people know, I made a video not too long ago, and it was obviously taken down for hate speech and bullying. Thank you, TikTok. I said it's evident now, especially, that the white people who in 2020 looked at all of our reading lists on race, bought the most recognizable titles, and left them on their bookshelf for decoration. Because it's fashionable to have Angela Davis on your bookshelf. When somebody goes through your library at a dinner party, where at that table somebody says that black life is optional, and you stay silent. What is the point of doing all this work? Sometimes I wonder. The goal is still 90. Sometimes what is the point of doing all of the work? How? Yep, absolutely. How do we understand our world? And how do we make other people understand our lived realities if our lived realities are going to be decoration on bookshelves? I'm doing a diploma in gender in education and institutions, and basically being able to write policy on gender. It's comfort, Lotus. It's absolutely comfort. It's the ability to scroll past our realities that we experience every day. It's the ability to say, this is optional for me. And see our struggling in this world of whiteness and white supremacy as our personal failings. Leftists don't read. Or, if they do, they're the TikTok commies who only read white theory. Which pisses me the fuck off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say goodnight to YouTube and Twitch. I'm going to stay on TikTok because this is important stuff that we're talking about in the comments here. If you want to join over there, please do. My handle is The Unscripted Revolution. It's the same as YouTube and Twitch. And I'll see you over there.